The deadbolt clicked shut, a final metallic sound that severed me from my own life. I stood on the porch, the cold November air biting at my cheeks, clutching a single duffel bag filled with a few changes of clothes and my work tools. Through the storm door's glass, I could see my mother, Eleanor, turn away without a flicker of emotion. My younger brother, Richard, stood just behind her, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He gave me a little wave, a mocking flick of his fingers, before drawing the curtains closed, plunging the living room into shadow. I was 58 years old, and I had just been kicked out onto the street by my own family. They didn't just throw me out of a house, they threw me out of the home that my sweat and sacrifice had paid for, brick by painful brick, over the last 35 years. You might wonder why I didn't fight, why I didn't scream or break down the door. You might ask how a man could be so easily discarded from his own life. To understand that, you have to understand the role I was assigned from birth. I wasn't a son, I was a utility, a tool to be used until I was no longer needed. And their mistake, the one that would unravel everything they had built on my back, was thinking I was broken. The truth is, that click of the deadbolt wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. It was the sound of my chains finally breaking. As I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching under my worn work boots, my mind didn't fixate on the cold or my homelessness. Instead, it drifted back 3 decades to a different kind of cold. A rainy night, a broken-down car on the side of a lonely highway, and a little boy, no older than 10, huddled under a flimsy jacket with his mother. They were stranded, scared, and completely alone. I was just a young man then, barely making ends meet myself. But I stopped. I spent 4 hours in the pouring rain fixing their engine, gave them the $20 I had in my wallet for gas and food, and never asked for anything in return. I never saw them again. I'd long since forgotten his face, but as I stood on the curb, watching my past fade behind a closed curtain, I had no idea that my one simple act of kindness from 30 years ago was about to come back to me, not as a memory, but as my salvation. I walked for what felt like hours, the duffel bag growing heavier with each step. The sun had set, and the streetlights cast long, lonely shadows on the pavement. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay in that neighborhood, a place where every corner held a memory that now felt like a betrayal. I ended up in the older part of town, where the buildings sagged and the neon signs of cheap motels flickered like dying embers. I found one called the Starlight Inn, though there was nothing stellar about it. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with a cigarette dangling from her lips, barely glanced at me as she took my cash for one night. The room smelled of stale smoke and bleach. I dropped my bag on the thin, patterned bedspread and sat down, the worn-out springs groaning under my weight. For the first time, alone in the silence of that dingy room, the reality of it all washed over me. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just empty. The machine that had been running for 58 years, working, providing, sacrificing, had finally been switched off. My entire life had been governed by a single promise, made to my father on his deathbed when I was just 23. Richard was only 16. Dad's hand was frail in mine, his voice a dry whisper. "Take care of them, David," he'd rasped. "Your mother, your brother, they'll need you. Promise me you'll always put them first." And I did. I promised. It was a sacred vow. I dropped out of my community college mechanic program to take over my father's shifts at the factory so Mom wouldn't lose the house. The house they just kicked me out of. I worked double shifts, weekends, holidays. Every dollar I earned went into that home, into her bank account. I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the property taxes. When Richard wanted a brand new car for his high school graduation, I sold my own beat-up truck, my only prized possession, and took the bus for 2 years to help pay for it. He crashed it 6 months later. When he decided college wasn't for him and wanted to find himself by backpacking through Europe, My savings account was drained to fund his adventure. I never took a vacation myself. Not once. I was the reliable one, the steady hand, the bedrock of the family. But a bedrock is meant to be stood upon, not cherished. Richard eventually married a woman named Karen, who was cut from the same cloth of entitlement. She saw me not as a brother-in-law, but as part of the household amenities, like the plumbing or the electricity. I was the live-in handyman, the free mechanic, the guy who paid the bills. They lived in the master bedroom, the one our parents had shared, while I remained in my small childhood room, its window overlooking the driveway. My paychecks went directly into the joint account my mother had insisted we set up years ago, to make things easier. From that account, she paid the mortgage and gave Richard and Karen a generous allowance to live on. Richard floated from one failed business idea to the next, each one funded by my labor. An online t-shirt company, a disastrous attempt at day trading, a half-finished course to become a life coach. I paid for all of it. Whenever a flicker of doubt entered my mind, whenever I thought about saving for my own future, my mother would sit me down. She'd put her hand on mine, her voice soft and full of false sincerity. David, this house is our legacy. It's your home as much as it is mine. When I'm gone, it all goes to you. You've earned it. She'd convinced me years ago to keep the deed solely in her name. It's simpler for taxes, dear, she had said. Less paperwork. Don't you trust me? And like a fool, I did. I trusted the woman who raised me, never once thinking she was weaving a 35-year-long lie. The final betrayal was triggered by the one thing I couldn't control, the factory closing down. After 35 years of loyal service, they gave me a small severance package and a pat on the back. For the first time in my adult life, the steady flow of money stopped. The utility had broken down. I was no longer useful. The argument started almost immediately. Karen complained about the financial strain. Richard said I needed to pull my weight. 2 weeks ago, my mother sat me at the kitchen table, the same one where I did my homework as a boy. She slid a piece of paper across the surface. It was a formal eviction notice. Richard and Karen need the space, she said, her voice as cold and sterile as a surgeon's scalpel. And frankly, David, without your income, you've become a burden. You have 30 days. The promise I made to my father was a shield they used against me for decades. And the moment I could no longer bleed for them, they cast me aside. I lay on that lumpy motel bed for 2 days, the television flickering with images of a world that no longer felt like mine. The severance check was the only thing I had left. $15,000. It felt like a fortune, and nothing at all, a final insult for 35 years of my life. I knew it wouldn't last long. The motel room alone was $50 a night. I had to do something. I still had my hands, my work ethic. I could start over. The next week was one of the most humiliating of my life. I bought a stack of newspapers and circled every job that seemed remotely possible. Handyman, custodian, delivery driver, stalker. At 58, I was a ghost. At the temp agencies, kids half my age looked at my resume, one job, 35 years, and gave me a pitying smile. "We'll call you if anything comes up," they'd say, a phrase I quickly learned meant, "Don't call us." I applied for a job stocking shelves at a grocery store, a job I could do in my sleep. The manager, a young man who couldn't have been older than 25, told me I was overqualified. He meant I was too old. The world had moved on, and it hadn't saved a place for me. My hope began to curdle into a quiet despair. Each rejection felt like another nail in the coffin my family had built for me. After a week of this, I had nothing to show for it but sore feet and a lighter wallet. I couldn't bear to stay in the motel room anymore, so I spent my days at the public library, pretending to read while I tried to figure out what to do. One afternoon, I walked to a small park to eat the sad sandwich I'd made. I sat on a bench, watching children play on the swings, their laughter a sound from a different universe. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. My balance had dipped below $14,000. A cold knot of panic tightened in my stomach. Just as I was sinking into that familiar emptiness, a sleek black car, a brand I didn't even recognize, pulled up to the curb. The engine was so quiet it barely made a sound. A man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out. He looked to be in his early 40s with a confident, easy posture. He was talking on his phone, but as he ended the call, his eyes swept across the park and landed on me. He paused. His brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of confusion, then recognition. He slowly walked over, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the grass. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and polite. "This is going to sound crazy, but 30 years ago, did you happen to fix a woman's broken-down sedan on the side of Route 8 during a thunderstorm?" I stared up at the man, my mind struggling to connect this powerful-looking figure with the small, shivering boy I remembered huddled in the passenger seat of that old sedan. The memory, foggy for decades, suddenly sharpened. The boy's wide, frightened eyes. The thin blanket his mother had wrapped around him. Yes, I stammered, my voice hoarse. "That was me. An old Ford Fairlane. The fuel pump gave out." A wide, genuine smile spread across the man's face, reaching his eyes. It was a smile of pure relief. "I knew it," he said, extending his hand. "My name is Ethan Vance. I have thought about you more times than I can count over the last 30 years. I never thought I'd ever get the chance to find you." I took his hand automatically. His grip was firm and warm. "David. My name is David." I felt a ridiculous urge to explain my appearance, my worn clothes, my cheap sandwich. I felt like a beggar being addressed by a king. "David," he repeated, nodding. "You probably don't know what you did for us that night. My mother and I were leaving my stepfather. We had nothing but what we could fit in that car. When it broke down, I thought we were done for, that he'd find us. You didn't just fix our car. You were the first stranger in a long time who showed us any kindness." He paused, his gaze growing more serious. "That $20 you gave my mom? We used it to get a motel room, the first safe place we'd slept in years. It was everything. You taught me a lesson that night that no business school ever could. That a person's true worth is measured by what they do for others when they have nothing to gain. I've tried to live by that." His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. To be told I had worth, that a single act of mine had mattered so profoundly, was something I hadn't heard in my entire life. My own family saw me as a wallet, a convenience. This stranger saw me as a hero. He glanced down at my meager lunch and the obvious weariness in my posture. His smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. "Listen, David," he said, his tone shifting. "I'm not going to let this moment pass. I was on my way to a dinner meeting, but it can be rescheduled. Please, allow me to buy you a real meal. I owe you that and so much more." I opened my mouth to refuse, to say I was fine, the old habit of not being a bother kicking in. But I looked at his earnest face, and for the first time in a long time, I decided to accept something that was offered to me, instead of just giving. "Okay," I said, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "Okay, Ethan. I like that." Ethan drove us to a restaurant in the heart of the city, a place where the lights were low and the voices were hushed. A valet took the keys to his car. Inside, a man in a suit led us to a quiet booth with plush leather seats. I felt a wave of self-consciousness wash over me. My worn jacket and faded jeans felt like a costume in this world of quiet luxury. I hadn't been to a real restaurant in over 20 years. Ethan didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't care. He treated me with a simple, profound respect that was more alien to me than the fancy silverware on the table. Once we ordered, Ethan leaned forward slightly. "David, You don't have to answer if you don't want to, he began, his voice low and serious. But the man I met on that park bench today is not the same man I remember from that rainy night. You had a light in your eyes then. Today you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. What happened to you? And so, for the first time in my life, I told someone everything. The words came out in a quiet, steady stream, fueled by the first real meal I'd had in weeks. I told him about my father's dying wish, the promise that had become a prison. I told him about Richard's endless failures, Karen's casual cruelty, and my mother's cold, manipulative deception. I explained how my paychecks had vanished into a joint account for 35 years to pay for a house that was never mine. I told him about the factory closing, the eviction notice, and the soul-crushing week of being told I was too old to be useful. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression slowly changing from compassionate curiosity to a cold, hard anger. The friendly warmth in his eyes was replaced by the focused intensity of a predator. He wasn't looking at me with pity. He was looking at my story as if it were a hostile takeover bid. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, slowly placing his fork down. They didn't just use you, David, he said, his voice dangerously calm. They defrauded you. They systematically stole your entire life's earnings, your labor, your future, your home. This isn't just a family dispute. This is grand larceny on a 30-year timeline. He looked me directly in the eye, and for the first time, I saw my situation not as a personal failure, but as a crime that had been committed against me. And we are going to get it all back. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message. First things first, you're done with that motel. You'll stay in the guest suite at my house for as long as you need. My driver will take you to get your bag after dinner. He put the phone down and met my gaze again, his jaw set with determination. And tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., you and I have a meeting with my lawyer. That night, I slept in a bed softer than any I had ever known. Ethan's guest suite was larger than the entire ground floor of the house I'd been kicked out of. It had a private bathroom with a shower that had more than 2 settings, and a closet that contained a plush robe. For a long time, I just stood there, running my hand over the smooth, cool marble of the countertop. It was a different world, a world of substance and quiet confidence, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was trespassing in it. Ethan's respect had given me a passport. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind was racing, replaying the day's events. The despair on the park bench, Ethan's sudden appearance, the quiet fury in his eyes as I told my story. His words echoed in my head. This isn't a family dispute. This is grand larceny. The bitterness I had carried for years, a dull, heavy stone in my gut, was sharpening into a fine, sharp point. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was anger, a clean, righteous anger. They hadn't just taken my money. They had stolen my life, my opportunities, my future. And now, I was going to make them give it back. The next morning, Ethan knocked on my door. He was holding a garment bag. I hope you don't mind, he said. I had my assistant pick up a few things. It's important that you feel confident today. Inside were a new pair of trousers, a crisp button-down shirt, a blazer, and new shoes. They weren't flashy, just simple, well-made clothes. As I put them on, I felt a strange transformation. I looked in the mirror and saw not the discarded old man from the factory, but someone else. Someone who deserved to be in the rooms he was about to enter. The lawyer's office was on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper with a panoramic view of the city. The lawyer's name was Ms. Alvarez, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 50s with eyes that missed nothing. Ethan made the introductions, and we sat in leather chairs facing her large mahogany desk. David, she began, her tone professional but not unkind. Ethan has given me the broad strokes, but I need to hear it from you. Start from the beginning. Omit nothing. With Ethan's reassuring presence beside me, I told my story again. This time, it was different. It wasn't a confession of a wasted life. It was a deposition. Ms. Alvarez listened, taking meticulous notes. She asked sharp, specific questions. The joint bank account? You said your entire check was direct deposited? For how long? Did your mother ever put in writing that the house would be yours? Do you have any records, tax returns, pay stubs? When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen on her legal pad. She looked from me to Ethan, then back to me. A slow, confident smile spread across her face. Gentlemen, she said, her voice laced with steel. This is the most clear-cut case of unjust enrichment and promissory estoppel I have seen in my entire career. They have a house, a car, a lifestyle, all built on 35 years of your assets. We're not just getting the house back, David. We are going to claw back every single dollar they siphoned from you, with interest. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Ms. Alvarez was a force of nature. She filed subpoenas for 35 years of bank statements from the joint account, my employment records from the factory, and my mother's tax returns. For the first time, I saw my life laid out in black and white, not as a series of sacrifices, but as a long list of financial transactions. My paychecks, regular as clockwork, flowing into the account. And the money flowing out. The mortgage payments, the property taxes, the hefty withdrawals that coincided perfectly with Richard's new car, his European vacation, and each of his failed business ventures. It was an undeniable, damning ledger of exploitation. While Ms. Alvarez built the case, Ethan focused on building me back up. One evening, he sat me down in his home office. David, he said, the legal battle might take time. You need a purpose, something for yourself. My company owns and manages a portfolio of commercial real estate. I need a new head of facilities for the downtown sector. Someone with real hands-on experience who knows how to fix things, not just how to call a contractor. The job pays a 6-figure salary, full benefits, and comes with a company vehicle. He slid a folder across the desk. I'm not offering you charity. I'm offering you a job you've been overqualified for your entire life. It's yours if you want it. Tears welled in my eyes. A job, a career, a title. It was everything I had given up on. I accepted without a moment's hesitation. The following Monday, I started my new life. I was given a new truck, a phone, a set of responsibilities. I was part of a team. People listened to my opinions. My experience was valued. For the first time since I was a young man, I felt a sense of pride, a feeling I thought was long dead. 2 weeks into my new job, Ms. Alvarez called me and Ethan into her office. On her desk was a single, thick envelope. We're ready, she said. We've finished the forensic accounting. We've calculated every dollar you earned, minus a generous estimate for your room and board, and compounded it with modest interest. The total amount they owe you is $1.6 million. She slid a document across the desk. It was a formal demand letter. It outlined our entire case in ruthless detail and demanded 2 things: the immediate transfer of the house title into my name and a structured settlement for the remaining balance. This is the opening shot, Ms. Alvarez explained. It gives them a chance to surrender before we destroy them in court. It's being delivered by courier to your mother's address as we speak. The clock starts now. The courier confirmed delivery of the letter at 2:15 p.m. that afternoon. I spent the rest of my workday in a state of nervous anticipation, my new company phone feeling like a 50-pound weight in my pocket. I imagined the scene at the house. My mother, Eleanor, opening the official-looking envelope. Her confusion turning to disbelief, then to pale, tight-lipped fury. I could practically hear Richard's predictable explosion of outrage, his voice, accustomed to a life of ease, cracking with indignation. They had poked the bear for 35 years, and the bear had finally turned around and sent them a bill. The call came at 6 o'clock, just as I was walking out of my office. It was Richard. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and answered, putting the phone on speaker so Ethan, who was waiting for me, could hear. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard's voice was a high-pitched screech, a blend of panic and arrogance. "A letter from some blood-sucking lawyer, demanding the house, and $1.6 million? Have you lost your mind, David?" I remained silent, letting him vent. The old me would have been flustered, already trying to apologize for his anger. The new me listened calmly, recognizing his tantrum for what it was: the sound of a parasite whose host was finally fighting back. "After everything we've done for you," he continued, his voice dripping with self-pity. "We gave you a roof over your head, we fed you, and this is how you repay our mother? By trying to make her homeless? You're a monster, an ungrateful snake." I waited for him to run out of breath. "Richard," I said, my voice even and cold, completely devoid of the emotion he was expecting. "You didn't give me a roof. I paid for that roof. I paid for the walls and the foundation beneath it. I paid for the food in the refrigerator and the electricity that powered it. I paid for your cars, your trips, and your hobbies. The letter is not a negotiation. It's an invoice for 35 years of services rendered." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He was completely unprepared for my composure. This is that rich friend of yours, isn't it?" he stammered. "He's twisting you, putting these sick ideas in your head." "My decisions are my own," I said, cutting him off. "You have 14 days left to have your lawyer contact Ms. Alvarez. Her contact information is in the letter. Do not call this number again." Before he could respond, I ended the call. A tremor ran through my hand as I set the phone down. It wasn't fear. It was the last aftershock of a lifetime of subservience. I looked at Ethan. He had a grim, satisfied smile on his face. "That," he said, "is the sound of checkmate. They just don't know it yet." For a week, there was only silence. I threw myself into my new job, learning the routines, meeting the maintenance staff across the various properties, and finding a deep, quiet satisfaction in solving problems. It felt good to be useful in a way that was appreciated, to end the day with a sense of accomplishment instead of just exhaustion. For the first time, I was building a life for myself, not just funding someone else's. Ethan was right. My family was panicking, and in their panic, they would make mistakes. Their mistake arrived on a Tuesday, in the form of a letter to Ms. Alvarez from a lawyer I'd never heard of. It was clear from the cheap letterhead and the rambling, unprofessional tone that they had found the most incompetent attorney in town, someone who told them exactly what their arrogant, delusional minds wanted to hear. The letter was a masterpiece of condescension. It referred to my 35 years of labor as a modest contribution to household expenses, consistent with a tenant. It called my claim frivolous and frankly insulting. Then came the offer. As a gesture of maternal grace, my mother was willing to offer me a one-time payment of $10,000 and would consider allowing me to return to the family home, provided I agreed to a formal rental agreement. Ms. Alvarez read the letter aloud to me and Ethan in her office, her face a mask of professional neutrality, but I could see the triumphant gleam in her eyes. "They've fallen right into the trap," she said, placing the letter on her desk as if it were a prize trophy. "They've responded not with a serious legal argument, but with insults and a laughably bad offer. They are confirming, in writing, that they are operating in bad faith. They are not taking this seriously. A judge will hate that." She leaned forward, all business. This was their one and only chance to negotiate. That chance is now gone. She picked up the phone on her desk. "Sandra," she said to her paralegal, "file the complaint against Eleanor and Richard Miller. Standard service. Go for the full 1.6, plus punitive damages for emotional distress and legal fees." Ethan and I sat in silence as she made the arrangements. The wheels of justice, which I never believed would turn for me, were now grinding into motion with unstoppable force. The time for letters and phone calls was over. The war had begun. A few days later, Ms. Alvarez's office received a frantic, sputtering call from my family's lawyer. A process server had arrived at the house right in the middle of their Sunday dinner. He had handed a thick, intimidating stack of legal documents to my mother and another to Richard, looked them both in the eye, and uttered the words they thought they would never hear. "You've been served." The lawsuit sent a shockwave through their insulated little world. The arrogance and dismissiveness were replaced by a clumsy, panicked scramble. Their lawyer, now facing a case far beyond his capabilities, was forced to comply with the discovery process. For my mother and Richard, this was a special kind of hell. They had to produce documents, answer formal questions in writing, and most terrifyingly for them, sit for depositions. A deposition is where the opposing lawyer gets to question you under oath before a trial. Every word is recorded. It's where lies go to die. Ms. Alvarez decided to depose Richard first. I wasn't in the room, but she gave me the transcript to read later. It was even more satisfying than I could have imagined. Richard, accustomed to being the smartest person in any room he entered, was torn apart by Ms. Alvarez's calm, surgical questions. She walked him through 30 years of bank statements. "Mr. Miller," she'd ask, her voice flat, "I see a series of withdrawals here in the summer of 2008, totaling $15,000. Can you tell me what those were for?" Richard would squirm, his cheap suit suddenly looking too tight. "That was for my trip to Europe to find myself." Ms. Alvarez would make a note. "And the funds for this soul-searching came from the account funded almost exclusively by your brother's factory job, correct?" He tried to bluster and deflect, but the numbers on the page were relentless. By the end, he was a sweating, stammering mess, his entitlement exposed as pathetic dependency. My mother's deposition was next. She tried a different tactic, playing the frail, elderly victim. She spoke of her love for her sons and the sanctity of the family home. Ms. Alvarez was unmoved. She brought up the promise I had made to my dying father. "Mrs. Miller, you were aware that your son David promised his father he would take care of you and Richard, correct?" "Of course," my mother said, dabbing at a dry eye with a tissue. "He was always such a good boy." "And for the next 35 years, Ms. Alvarez continued, her voice like ice, "you leveraged that deathbed promise to extract his entire life's earnings to fund a comfortable life for yourself and your other son, all while repeatedly promising him this very house would one day be his. Is that an accurate summary?" My mother's performance faltered. Faced with the cold, ugly truth of her actions, stripped of all emotional decoration, she crumbled. The transcript noted that she simply stared at the table, refusing to answer. Her silence was more damning than any confession. 2 days after the depositions, Ms. Alvarez received a phone call. It was a new lawyer, a partner from a major downtown firm. Richard and Eleanor's first attorney had quit. The new lawyer was professional, serious, and clearly hired to stop the bleeding. "My clients are prepared to offer Mr. Miller the immediate transfer of the house," he said, "plus a cash settlement of $250,000 in exchange for dropping the lawsuit." The first real offer had been made. The walls were beginning to crumble. I looked at Ms. Alvarez, then at Ethan. For a moment, the old David, the one who was conditioned to accept crumbs and be grateful, considered the offer. The house and enough money to live on. It was more than I'd ever had. But then I saw the firm set of Ethan's jaw and the confident fire in my lawyer's eyes. This wasn't about a comfortable retirement. This was about justice. It was about the principle of the thing. They didn't just owe me a house. They owed me a life. "No," I said, the word feeling powerful and clean. "Reject it." Ms. Alvarez smiled. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that." She conveyed our rejection to their new lawyer, along with our intention to proceed to a jury trial, where we would present every last shred of evidence of their 35-year fraud. That was the move that broke them. Their own lawyer, ethically bound to give them sound advice, told them the truth. They would be crucified in a public courtroom. A jury of ordinary working people would listen to my story, look at their pampered, parasitic lives, and award me everything I was asking for, and likely more in punitive damages. They would be publicly humiliated and left with absolutely nothing but a mountain of debt. Faced with total annihilation, they folded completely. Their lawyer requested one final meeting to discuss the terms of a complete settlement. This time, the meeting was on our turf, in the same conference room where they had been deposed. When I walked in with Ethan and Ms. Alvarez, I saw my mother and Richard already seated at the far end of the long table. They looked shrunken, their faces pale and drawn. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed terror. There was no argument, no negotiation. Ms. Alvarez dictated the terms of their surrender. They would sign the deed to the house over to me, effective immediately. They would liquidate Richard's car and any other assets to make a lump sum payment of $50,000. For the remainder of the balance, they would agree to a legal judgment, allowing my legal team to garnish their future wages until the full debt was settled. They were given 30 days to vacate my property. They sat in silence, their expensive lawyer occasionally whispering to them. Finally, he nodded. My mother picked up the pen, her hand trembling so badly she could barely sign her name. Richard followed, his signature a furious, illegible scrawl. Before they left, I spoke for the first and last time. I looked directly at my mother, then at my brother. I never broke my promise to Dad, I said, my voice calm and steady. I took care of you. I gave you everything. All I ever wanted in return was a family. But you took my money, my home, and my life. And when you thought I was all used up, you threw me out like a piece of trash. I stood up, feeling a weight I didn't even know I was carrying lift from my shoulders. This was never about hate. It was about balancing the books. You have 30 days. 3 months later, I stood on the porch of my house. The inside had been repainted, the air cleansed of old memories. My new work truck was parked in the driveway where Richard's BMW used to be. The sun was warm on my face. I had my job. I had the friendship of a good man. And most importantly, I had my self-respect. They had tried to erase me, but in the end, their greed was the very thing that set me free.